Happy Father's Day to you, and congratulations to the Dub Nation. We have gathered together. This is a little bit unusual for us, but we were not available to get all three of us together on the weekend to be able to do this live, so we are coming to you in advance, bringing this, because I really believe and felt that it was going to be of value. We'll see. We'll see if it is.
Don't be skeptical like that.
We'll see if it is when we get to the end. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to each of us talk about our unique experiences and kind of the wound that we carry because of our family of origin and especially our father. And then after that, we're going to kind of say what has been helpful for us, and then maybe one piece of advice from each of us. And we'll kind of run through it that way, and hopefully it's going to be really helpful for y'all as well. The Wild at Heart, a book by John Eldredge, said this: every boy in his journey to become a man takes an arrow in the center of his heart, in the place of his strength. And because the wound is rarely discussed and even more rarely healed, every man carries that wound around. And the wound is nearly always given by the father. I would say that my story, coming from a divorced home, my father left when I was 11 years old. And early on, when I was about 13, he came back. I hadn't seen him since I was 11, and then I see him at 13. Then I don't see him for many, many years. But at 13, he came to me and he said, what are you doing now? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I've started playing football. I'm on the football team now. And he just flat out told me, I can still remember, he flat out told me, you should quit. You shouldn't play. Steve, swim or run track. You're too small. You're too frail. You'll never make it. You'll never make it in football. And I thought that I grew up with this love of football, but about the age of 30, through the help of some guidance and somebody kind of coaching me through what I was going through, I realized that I liked proving my father wrong way more than I liked really playing football. And what happened was my mother and I, we made this kind of pact. And every time I got my name in the paper or had a picture of me in the paper playing football, from the 7th grade on, we mailed it to him.
Wow.
We mailed it to him all the way into college. I was fortunate enough to make small college All-American, and we sent him 3 copies of that deal.
And did you hope to hear back? Did you hear back?
I didn't care. I just wanted him to know that he was wrong about me. But what it set in motion for me was this performance trap. That I have to perform to be loved.
Right.
And I'd say that if I were to try to narrow my wound down, it would be that I carry this real fear of failure and a fear that people won't really love me if I don't perform well. Mm-hmm. By God's grace, I'm over that more than I was certainly when I was 13,
sure.
And way more than I was at 30 even. But I know that I still carry that. I know that some things bother me still more than they should.
So your dad left when you were 11, and you were the oldest, right?
I was, of 5 kids.
And he just left the whole family, just abandoned the whole family.
Whole family, no child support.
Oh man,
nothing. My whole time, he actually left the state so that they couldn't catch him.
Wow.
How about you, Dan?
Well, I was adopted, so that my story is adoption, and so I was born on September 2nd, and I was premature. Or immature, what's the word? Premature.
Premature.
Yeah.
We're talking about back then, not today.
Yeah, sorry. And so I was in the hospital from September 2nd to November 17th, so 2.5 months. I was unbelievably underweight. The doctors were like, I don't know if he'll ever grow or be strong, so booyah. And
you overcame that.
I did. Still underweight.
Mail him that clip.
So, and from there, I was awarded the state for that time, and then this couple that couldn't have kids, it was a kindergarten teacher and an Air Force engineer, Bob and Tieche. They couldn't have kids, and so they submitted their application to the state of Ohio, and they were placed as my adoptive parents. And so on November 17th, I came home from the hospital for them for good. And so that was kind of my story. And that was great. My parents were fantastic at explaining, hey, you're adopted, you're different.
Wow. Super open about that whole process.
From the get-go.
From the get-go,
Yeah.
right? Nothing was hidden. And so they were like, hey, we didn't choose you. God chose you to give to us. And my mom had this poem, not flesh of my flesh, not bone of my bone, but still remarkably just like my own. And it was kind of weird because my mom and I actually kind of looked similar. So, people say, oh, you can really tell that he's your son. And, it was cool. But in first grade, and you just don't, I just thought that was normal. I had no idea. In first grade, my mom taught at this elementary school where I attended, and in first grade, she was a kindergarten teacher, and one of her first grade colleagues was talking about family structure and talking about adoption, and she says, well, who's adopted is Mrs. Tieche's son David. And so I was like, yeah, I'm adopted. And then Matt Bowman, who sat right next to me, I remember he used to bring his Transformers to school and, put them in his desk and we would play with them.
As you do.
Well, as I still do. And he turned to me and he said, hey, what was wrong with you that your mom wanted to get rid of you? And that arrow just went in. And I guess similar to you, it wasn't so much performance as it was approval. And so I labored for the next 17, 18 years to prove that I was worth keeping around. And it's nothing that my adopted parents did. They didn't do that. It was not their fault. I remember probably second or third grade, I would rehearse speeches in front of the bathroom mirror with all of my awards and plaques and certificates to give a message to my birth mom about why she should have kept me and the reasons why I was good enough to keep. I mean, it was, and I don't know where that came from, except that the need for approval. So I think that was my deepest heart wound, and that took me all the way through college.
And then isn't it crazy how these wounds, we turn them into strengths that then we get celebrated for in the culture, which only sort of reinforces, your intellect, your wit, your ability as a speaker is sort of compensating for this wound, and then it gets sort of fed, and then it becomes sort of this fine line of this is something that I need to be aware of and deal with, but there's also this thing of I've turned this unfortunate thing into a good thing. I find that so tricky to, to sort of shake off a wound in the sense of, at least most guys I know, we overcompensate for it, we get good at it, we get celebrated for it and paid for it.
Yeah, and coaches celebrated the fact that I would do anything to make the team.
Right, to prove yourself.
That made it a super good deal. But at some point, there's a shadow side to those strengths, and they begin to show up.
Exactly.
Josh, how about you?
All right, so my web is a little tricky. So my biological father, my biological mother was 17 when she got pregnant with me.
Wow.
And my biological father, as best that I can piece together, was unaware that he got this girl pregnant at prom. She just, very conservative society in Oklahoma, she sort of slipped away, had this baby, me, and then left me at the hospital when I was born. And so, sort of my initial message coming into the world was, whatever you do, do not trust adults. Because I sort of had this initial adult break my trust, burn, cut and run. My mind was unable to differentiate. Hey, maybe this adult untrustworthy, this adult, let them in, that's a good one. So every adult after her, I didn't trust, and I pushed away. And I pushed away for no reason. I was that kid who I intentionally sort of mastered the art of getting kicked out of foster homes. I became great at it. I was oppositional, defiant. I was, every teacher's worst nightmare to have in their class and every parent's worst nightmare of what their kid could turn into. Wow. I became that kid. And so, when kids don't talk out, they'll act out. And really what I was trying to do was, because I grew up in such dysfunction and lack of control, I perfected controlling situations, right? I could push you away, and that was me controlling the situation. Oh, you think you're kicking me out of your foster home, but I pushed you to the point where you had no other option.
How many foster care homes were you in growing up?
I don't know the exact number, but it was north of a dozen.
Wow.
It was north of a dozen. And so this wound, this control issue, haunts me to this day. I mean, sort of a silly example I recall is my sweet daughter, Katie, and Gus, I'll have you edit in a photo of her. I emailed it to you, actually. Here she is. See, I'm controlling this situation right now. But my sweet daughter, Katie, she's like lovely, as you can see. One day she's like playing with all of her toys and has made this enormous mess of it. And I've like tried all the techniques to like get her to pick it up. Like, do you want to pick it up now or 5 minutes from now? I tried all that garbage, right? And like nothing's working. And I'm getting frustrated by my inability to control the situation. And finally I just look at her and I say, Katie, if you do not pick up your toys right now, I'm gonna scoop them all up and burn them. And Katie looks at me and she says, Daddy, if you do that, I will punch you in the penis.
Kind of lost control of the situation, didn't
Well, as a father of a cute daughter, I go, that's a life skill you might need to know how to do. But it was a situation of like, ha, 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 isn't that funny? Like this, quirky thing my daughter said to like, oh, this is my foster kid narrative coming to haunt me of like, here's a situation I can't control. So what do? I go nuclear.
Wow.
I cut and run.
Yeah.
I burn down the situation. I'm not a man of the cloth like you two fine gentlemen here, but
Thank you very much.
The Bible talks about, let me school you for a moment, this idea of sins of the father, and the familiar situation. And I go, man, this is me present day. That if something is outside of my control, I'll either try to control it, or if I can't, I will cut and run and I'll go nuclear.
Wow. Wow. Thanks a lot. Thanks, both of you, for sharing those things. Second question is maybe what's been most helpful in your path toward manhood? Just to set it up a little bit, Donald Miller had a book that he wrote, To Own a Dragon, where he talks about his own journey. And Miller uses the metaphor that a father is like an air traffic controller. And there's always someone ahead of you that's radioing in information and helping you along the way. But when you don't have a father, you don't know the pockets of turbulence. You don't know where you're supposed to taxi. And it's almost like flying blind in that. As you've been trying to work your way through that, maybe Josh, start with you this time. What's been helpful, or what's really been something that's really encouraged you along the way?
The air traffic controller idea is interesting in the sense that the best way I can articulate like being a father is I feel like I'm flying a plane while I'm building the plane.
In the air, yeah.
Right, in the air, right. And that's not a United Airlines drag you off the plane joke. That's just like, this is a situation in the sense of like, even the normal, I moved in with a great set of foster parents at 14, Rodney, and he was a great father to me. But prior to that, like, I didn't really have a dad around. So I don't know, like, what does a normal dad do during a normal day? Like, what is normal? What is healthy? Like, how do you respond to birthdays? How do you respond to meltdowns? Like, how do you, how do you comfort your wife? Like I kind of get instinct, what's unhealthy and what's, like, when I'm going in that direction. But what's, like, normal? Like, what's the baseline? Like, am I doing well at this or not? Like, how far off am I? So for me, what's been helpful is intentionally seeking out perspective. And I try to do that in two ways. Number one, by intentionally meeting with fathers who are a step or two ahead of me. So their kids are older or their kids are out of the house, and be like, this situation, I feel like such a screw up, such a failure, like I have no perspective here. What's going on? And most of the time they're like, oh, I remember feeling like that too, and you're normal, and like, don't beat yourself up about it.
It's almost reassuring to hear that you're not the only one traveling down that road, right?
Right. We're all screwed up, and we're all fearful that we're the only screw up in the room.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to go like, yeah, that's normal, but here's a blind spot perhaps you're not seeing. Or if I was to go back, when I had kids that age, here's what I thought was most important, but actually here's what's most important. So number one, meeting with dads who are a few steps ahead of me for perspective, but also intentionally meeting with fathers who are a few steps behind me for perspective. Because otherwise, a guy like me who's control freak, driven, I can lose perspective of how far I've come. and the growth that I have had.
Yeah.
And the handful of minor accomplishments and successes that I have had as a father. So it's helpful for me to be able to hear, father of a newborn, like, and if they can even stay awake during our meeting, and me be able to go, okay, here's a helpful perspective or two. But I walk away from that going, man, Josh, you have grown. And indeed, you don't got to figure it out. And please, let's not go there. But, perspective to me is so key, not isolating yourself and having someone a few steps in front of you and a few steps behind.
I remember still, I was 24 years old, and just tells you something about the friends that I had in high school. I had never seen healthy home.
Wow.
I'd never seen it done. I'd never walked into a home ever and said, this is it. That seems so strange to me, but the fact is that most of my friends came from divorced homes as well, or their parents fought or didn't love each other, or at least didn't act like it. And so I remember we're 24 years old, and we went into the Hamblin's home. I've told this story before. But we went into the Hamblin's home, and I remember walking in there going, this is it. This is health.
Well,
this is what it
was
looks
it?
like.
What were
Were
the
they
dad
coaches
points?
or friends? Or?
They're like, the kids were involved, but still under control, but not under the thumb of the dad. You could tell that their personalities were coming out. The father was...
It didn't seem like a show.
Didn't seem like a show, like they were acting a certain way because of that. At that time, I was just a football coach, and they had just invited us over to get to know us because we were new at the church. So I wasn't the pastor that they were trying to put on a show for. The father and the mother were affectionate towards one another in appropriate ways, but in playful ways.
Yeah.
We sat down at the meal, and there was never any tension at the meal. You know how you sit down with some families, and everybody's like,
Right.
on
As soon
edge.
as this guy leaves, we're going at it.
Yeah, I'm going to get you for that when everybody leaves. I mean, It was just so relaxed and so healthy that it was just a wonderful, wonderful
Were you married at
experience.
that point?
We were. We had just gotten married,
Oh, I
and we
see.
had just started attending the very first church I ever went to. I didn't go to church until I was almost 24. And so they had this small church, and the Hamblins invited us to come by one weeknight and
So
have
that
dinner
almost
with their
became
family.
like a North Star to you.
It
like,
did.
This is healthy and reasonable and appropriate.
And we stayed close with them for a long time, even after they moved down towards Austin and left the church. We love the Hamblins.
That's so good
You had
in
something
a
like that
sense.
with the Big Brothers Big Sisters, right? You had a big brother that really...
Yeah, it kind of showed me healthy, and I think that's so important to get that snapshot of like sort of realistic and healthy, particularly in our society today where so much of our posts on social media are carefully sort of curated.
Yeah, for
Of
sure.
like, kids going berserk, but there was this 1 second where they're like cute and smiling and like normal, and we take a snapshot of that. And I mean, even some of the research shows that sort of comparing our like chaos to this curation,
Facebook life.
right, becomes this divide that again furthers that narrative of I'm the only screw up in the room.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
like whoa, because I can't ever get my kids to stand straight like that and dress up and all that.
Yeah.
Can't even get my daughter to pick up her toys.
Dad, how about you? What's been helpful for you?
I was thinking about this. I don't have any biological I didn't have any biological connection to anyone in this world until my son was born. He was the first person who I shared DNA with.
Man.
So that was
Or at least that you knew.
Or that I knew, or that I came into, that I knew. And so that idea of created family or adopted family, like there's all these beautiful images in the Bible about God adopting us.
Yeah.
And I know this is going to cause me to lose street cred, but I loved the musical Annie, about this little
This
girl.
is of no surprise to me.
No, I know. Well, Jay-Z sampled it, so there's some street cred there.
Oh, okay.
It's a hard knock life. But this idea of being adopted and winning the lottery with Daddy Warbucks was like really deeply moving to me, because I felt like I went from a situation where I was probably going to be born into poverty, probably to a non-college graduate, and my destiny would have been kind of locked down into that. And because of this adopted family that I had been given, I believe by God, I'd been adopted into this, I won the lottery. I mean, I had education, I had stability. It really was the grace of God. So and then on top of that, the local church, like I'm an only child. I have no brothers and sisters, but throughout my time, I have such a high view of the local church.
Yeah.
It might even be too high because it has been my family. I don't have brothers and sisters, but I have brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a
Exactly.
spiritual mom and dad, but I had a spiritual mom and dad. I mean, God gave me all these things. So for me, the local church really was transformative in my understanding of myself and God and healing these father wounds.
Yeah.
God clearly took care of me in ridiculous and providential ways. And that's like non-disputable. So for me, that was a big deal.
Well, it's interesting because I wasn't raised in the church and didn't go there till I was 24. But right there's the first picture I have of health and how I wanted to model our family.
Yeah.
After somebody. That's interesting. The thing that I found helpful for me, and it was a gift from God, I believe. I had this long gap where my father was out of my life, and actually moved to California in the early 90s, and there was a private investigator that was part of our church that I was working at. And I went to him and I said, "Do you find people? I mean, or is that just on TV or something?" And he said, "No, I can actually help find people." And so I gave him my father's name. And I said, he lives somewhere in Southern California, the last I heard, which was many years ago.
Sure.
And he came back a few weeks later and gave me a name.
He was able to find him?
He found an address.
Wow.
And so I wrote this weird letter. "Dear Tom Clifford, if you're the Tom Clifford who has 5 children with Connie, I'm your oldest son, Steve, and I've got 2 sons who would love to meet their grandfather." And I just kind of initiated this thing.
And you sent that letter out?
I sent the letter out, and I said, if this is you, here's how you can call me.
You might remember me from all the newspaper clips.
Yeah, I'm the guy from the newspaper clippings.
Right.
Anyway, so it ends up about 3 or 4 weeks later, I get a call from my dad.
Whoa.
And
Wow.
he calls and says, "I'm coming up for a fishing trip. I live in Southern California." He actually lived in Long Beach. And he says, "I'm coming up and I'll come by and see you if that's okay." And I said,
Whoa.
"Absolutely." So now I've
How
got
did
this.
you feel going into that meeting?
So I'm really nervous because all of my images of my father were this big, giant guy.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the things that I had in my mind, he was this big, strong, and violent man who beat me and beat my mom and beat it was that image. And so I'm pretty nervous. I'm trying to deal with all these things. I think,
How old are you at this point?
I'm 34 now.
Okay.
So I feel like, I got this all together, but I have to admit, I'm
sure.
really pretty nervous.
Sure.
And he comes in, and and this is going to be so strange for all of I don't even know anyway, let me just admit it. When he drove up, I saw him, and I opened the door, and I stepped out on the front porch to meet him. And when he walked across my yard, I knew I could kick his butt. Now, I know it's a weird thing to say.
So that was the first thing.
But that's the first thing that came to my mind, is that man who I could never stop from beating my mother.
Oh, wow.
I knew I could stop him now.
Doesn't sound weird to me.
Anyway, for me, it was a super affirming.
Wow.
It's a strange thing. I know it's not, it's not a great thing for a pastor maybe to say, but when I saw him, I just realized that. So I had this bolt of confidence.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That I can speak to him as a peer.
Yeah.
And not as this child.
That makes sense.
And so when he came in, he began to speak as if it was dishonoring. I felt like he was dishonoring to my mother, and I felt like he was dishonoring to the past. He kind of acted like nothing had ever happened. And I just stopped him in the middle of it. I said, "Look, here, I obviously want a relationship with you, and I'm glad you're here, and I hope that this can continue, but you're not going to."
What did he say in particular?
What he said, he had this little phrase, and he was talking about what he does and this and this and this, and he said, "Steve, you know me. You know how I am." And I just went, something clicked. I said, "Whoa, wait, time.
As if to excuse.
I don't know you.
Right.
I don't know how you are.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we got no relationship here, so I'm not going to let you disrespect my mother or disrespect how you abandon us."
Wow.
That all happened. And if you're not willing to act like it happened, then we're not going to be able to move forward.
Looking back on how you responded in that scenario, do you look back on it with any regret? Do you feel as if you were at all sort of overamped up and trying to course correct the situation? Or you feel like, if I had to go at that again, that's how I'd handle
No, I think by
Like a
God's
message
grace,
needed to be sent.
I think by God's grace, it needed to be said. He needed
Sure.
to face it.
Yeah.
We couldn't move forward in any kind of reconciliation unless he admits and
Sure.
goes.
Yeah.
So
Did he?
what it did, he did, and he said, "I'm sorry." He stopped and just got real sorrowful and said, "I'm sorry. You're right."
Good for him.
I was shocked. And what it did what it did was it opened up this floodgate of forgiveness for him that I thought I'd already dealt with. Now, I've been a Christian for, many years by now, 16, 17 years by the time I'm 34. Wow. And I was a pastor by that time, and I thought I'd talked and preached on forgiveness.
Sure,
I thought I'd already done it.
Sure,
but the truth was I had not released him. And
sure.
what happened by just seeing him and seeing that I could talk to him as peer-to-peer and also kind of seeing that I could confront him, it just allowed me to let him go, to let all the things go that I felt like he owed me.
Right.
I'm really grateful for that day. Really grateful for
That's
it.
beautiful. I remember hearing this one-word definition of what does it mean to be a man. Responsibility. Taking responsibility. And even, again, not a man of the cloth, though I am ordained online. I've done a few weddings. Not to brag, there was a drop-down menu of titles you could choose. I'm Archbishop. So
Archbishop?
maybe a little bit of respect, okay?
Most holy high.
That's right.
Most high holiness.
Right, Reverend. Right, Reverend Dave.
Right, Reverend, okay.
But even the idea that Jesus took responsibility for us and that he didn't have to and that, it was our bad and our situation. And that's always been an encouragement to me. And that's what I hear in, your father's story of though this passed, though these things, maybe some he was hard-hearted towards, maybe some he genuinely, earnestly regretted, taking responsibility.
Let's wrap this up by giving some folks some advice, maybe a thing that you've learned from your own path. And Josh, I'll start with you. What kind of advice would you give to folks out there that are wrestling with a past that kind of trips them up?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, it's weird. I don't feel qualified to give advice, though I get paid to go around and give parenting seminars and write books on the topic. I feel like, maybe I bat 350, myself.
Which will get you in the Hall of Fame.
Well, there you go. All right.
Maybe not in the Parenting Hall of Fame.
Fair enough. But it's one thing to know what to do and then to follow it,
Right.
So just in full disclosure, I probably follow this 30, 40% of the time. And the other times, my emotions or my desires or my selfishness, it gets the best of me. But what I have found, I'm a practical guy, so what I found practically very helpful is to kind of, as a father, as a husband, look back on days that I've had that I would sort of look at that and say, hey, that went pretty well. Mm-hmm. My quirks and insecurities and where I get triggered, like I had that under control. I was present. I was patient. I was tough. I was tender. I was all that.
Right.
Kind of the checklist of that was a good day. And when I carefully examine those days, I can point to a handful of sort of self-disciplines that I engaged in. So we all need different things, but for me, that's devotional. To me, that's running. Gets me in a good headspace, works through kind of anxieties that I have, and connecting deeply with a friend who knows me. Not like the bio version of me, but knows the darkest and the brightest spots of me. So when I look back on days that kind of just accidentally went well, I go, man, maybe those 3 or 4 things, that I sort of unintentionally did, I need to, moving forward, intentionally look to do as often as humanly possible, because it's not going to guarantee success in my role as a father and a husband, but it's going to give me a way better shot at being like a decent human being, an engaged husband, and a loving father. And even on the days where, it's busy or I'm traveling or it's stressful, we got this thing going on, I just think reduce the scope, stick to the schedule.
Wow.
Reduce the scope, stick to the schedule. Now I acknowledge this is even me trying to control the situation, but I go, hey, this is like a pro and a con of you. So if that's what you got to do to give yourself the best shot of being like a decent father and husband that day, intentionally try to do that as often as
It's not
you
a
can.
selfish act to make sure you take care of those things.
No,
Because
it's
the very best you shows up
No,
when
and I
you
get
do
up
them.
at 4:30 in the morning like an old man, right? So I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock, people. So my wife calls me an old man from time to time. But, that's what I got to do to sort of, that's my on-deck circle routine. Like, if I do this, I am way more likely to look back and go, that was a solid day.
Wow. Dave?
Yeah, I think I had to come to the conclusion pretty early on that I needed help. And so there was a posture of I had to adopt a posture of humility, that I was more messed up than I'd like, and that I think once I had my son and he came into the world, I felt this weight, because you feel the weight of responsibility in a way that I never had before.
Yes.
There's a human life here that's depending on me, and I became painfully aware that my character defects would actually affect him if I didn't let God work on that. And that was a deep fear. I knew my kids would be in counseling because of me. I just didn't want it to be too long, too expensive.
My friend Kendall says every father needs two funds: a college fund and a counseling fund.
So for me, it was that. It was going to counseling, which is kind of a stigma, I think, for a lot of folks. But it wasn't for me. I get better when people who are smart, who are Christian psychologists, help me work through my issues.
Yeah.
For me, it's meeting with mentors, having people in my life who are older who can speak into that, and I've always sought that out. And Steve, you've been one, and there's been so many others. And just sitting around and saying, what do I need to learn? You're ahead of me. And then we have for me, the other thing, I need just friends who are intentional about knowing me and helping me through this, because it's a lonely job being a dad. It sometimes is a burden. It's tough being a father, being a husband. It's not the easiest job because there's so much. So when I moved out here in California, I moved with my best friend from college, and we started a men's group. And Josh, you've been a part of that since 2001. We've met every single Tuesday night, just a group of us to ask the question, what's going on in your life? What's God trying to do? And
It's shockingly honest and just frank and raw.
And so we've been doing that, and those guys have helped me become a better husband. They're there to defend my kids and my wife against my selfishness and my predilections. They're there to uphold me when it's good, and be brutally honest when it's not.
Yeah.
You're right. Being dads, it's tricky. I remember thinking, just last week, I had this dichotomy of like the respect you by default get in your workplace, and the respect by default sometimes you get from your kids. I remember 2 weeks ago, I went and did this big speech. There's like 6,000 people. They paid to be there. They clap and all this stuff. And I go home and my kids won't listen to me. And I'm like, do you realize there were people out there that paid and that,
just to hear my voice?
Right, but you come in, right, which is awkward, but you can come in with this overinflated sense of this posture, a lack of humility, because this is given to me over here, fairly or unfairly, I sometimes I got to realize I got to come in here and earn this too. I got to earn this platform, this respect, this listening through loving and caring and trusting and all that.
Well, being a little bit ahead of y'all, and my kids are grown, and now I'm into the new season of grandkids. My advice would be any success that you attribute to yourself that's attached to your children is probably not going to serve you well, because they are full-fledged human beings that have to make their own decisions at some point. And they're going to make decisions you don't like, they're going to make decisions that you really like. So my advice, if I could just talk to the men who can hear our voices right now, I would say I would make it goal one in my family sphere to love my wife well. I would make it a priority over the love I have for my children, the love that I have for my job, the love that I have for my hobbies, loving my wife and figuring out what it looks like to pull out of her the best rendition of her.
Yeah.
To see Jesus in her and how Jesus is working and encourage and to bring that out, I just think that would be my advice for you. In Matthew 19, Jesus he quotes the Old Testament where he says, a man will leave his mother and father, and he will cleave and become, united to his wife. And that word there literally means to get glued to. And so I want you to think of not just a Elmer's glue, which is really a water-based solvent that's going to dry and form this sticky thing that holds things together, but more like the super glue. And I looked this up. Super glue works the way it does because of anionic polymerization. And it basically means that a new material is formed between the two objects.
Right.
And that there's a fusing of them together. And I think that there's something to the Bible when it says the two will become one flesh. I think there's something to thinking of it as you've been superglued by the Holy Spirit of God, and this is your partner for life.
Right.
Give her the attention that she might be all that God intended her to be, to step up into that mantle.
That's good.
And to not 50-50 relationship, not meet in the middle relationship. You go 100%, even if she won't budge an inch. You commit yourself to loving her well. And I think that everybody wins. The children win because of the stability in the home.
Sure.
Obviously, the husband and wife win because they're in a relationship where you're at least working at it. Now, I don't do this perfectly, and Dana would be the first to rise up and give testimony to that. But I mean, I have in my journal written down a few things that I want in my life to be said of me. And one of the things, the first thing has to do with my faith, but the second thing has to do with that I would love one woman well all my life.
That's awesome.
And that would be, I think, my advice for folks to there.
Super helpful to me.
Super powerful.
Okay, let's pray together. God, first, I thank you for Josh and for Dave and for the evidence, even in my own life, of how your grace has filled in the gaps where human relationships have failed. And you have been most gracious. As it says in the Psalms over and over again, you have been the father to the fatherless. You have stepped up and rescued those that need you and that call out to you. And we're grateful, God. We're grateful, God, to be able to tell our stories, and we hope that it's been done in a way where it encourages others when they see their own situations, and it gives you glory for what you've done. All of the credit, God. I know that these two guys would say with me, all of the credit, God, goes to you. And so now we ask that in your power and in your might, you would infuse a sense of hope to all who listen, that you are their strength, you are their courage, and that you will do the same for them that you have done for us. And that people that are listening would really invite and surrender to you their lives, that you might do exceedingly and abundantly beyond all we could ask or imagine. God, we claim the promise that eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor thought ever even entered into the hearts of man. All of the good things that you have in store. So fill folks with hope that we might be the friends, the spouses, the parents, the grandparents that you're calling us to be. May it be so, God. Give us the grace and the faith to trust you in it. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.